The chamber of the Galactic Council vibrated with low murmurs, its walls alive with shifting lights that mirrored the unease of those gathered. Representatives from dozens of species leaned forward, their voices sharp, their postures exuding certainty as they reviewed intercepted transmissions of the Terran fleets. To them, the ships of Earth were curiosities at best, hulking constructs of outdated alloys and redundant systems that seemed archaic compared to the sleek precision of galactic engineering. Charts and data projections were shared across the chamber, highlighting inefficiencies, poor energy conversion rates, and thick armor plating that many dismissed as wasteful indulgence from a race new to the stars. Words like primitive and inelegant echoed through the space as the consensus hardened. Humanity's vessels were crude, and so too would be their presence among the stars. In the middle of the noise, a figure rose, one who had watched conflicts unfold across centuries of spacefaring history. His voice cut through the derision with a measured weight, forcing silence from those who had been so eager to laugh. He told them plainly that the human ships were not what they appeared to be. Every rivet, every seemingly clumsy weld carried intent. They were not built for grace, but for something far more dangerous: endurance. He spoke of how humans carried a philosophy unlike any other race he had studied, one shaped by an existence on a hostile world where survival meant preparing for disaster, adapting under pressure, and refusing to surrender. Their ships reflected that mindset perfectly. They were not fragile machines calibrated for perfection. They were designed to be battered, broken, and still come back fighting. The Council listened, though skepticism lingered. Many dismissed the warning as paranoia from a relic of older wars. The younger voices were louder, intoxicated by the superiority of their own technologies. They pointed to their own fleets, sleek, optimized, governed by flawless algorithms that left no room for error. In their arrogance, they believed perfection was invincible. But the veteran countered with stories he had gathered, whispers carried from distant patrols and skirmishes along uncharted borders. He described how human captains commanded ships that seemed to shrug off damage that would have crippled any other craft, how their crews adapted to systems failure with almost instinctual improvisation, and how what should have been weaknesses became their most lethal strength. The chamber grew tense as he painted the picture of a philosophy none of them understood: humanity embraced imperfection. Where other species strove for elegance and flawlessness, humans prepared for failure and built around it. A human vessel could lose half its systems and still operate. Power conduits were rerouted manually. Damaged hulls were patched mid-battle with crude efficiency. Redundant engines sputtered back to life under conditions that should have rendered them useless. To species who trusted in their automation and precise designs, it was incomprehensible. To humans, it was survival. What unsettled the Council most was not simply the description of the ships, but the people inside them. These were not crews that panicked at system warnings or retreated at overwhelming odds. They carried the same stubbornness as their vessels, fighting with a determination born from a history of enduring plagues, wars, and disasters on their own world. The veteran warned that when the galaxy finally decided to test them, it would not encounter fragile newcomers. It would encounter survivors armed with machines built in their own image, resilient, relentless, and terrifying in their refusal to break. The chamber quieted, but pride lingered, wrapping the Council in a cocoon of superiority. Some scoffed openly, claiming that brute force and redundancy were no substitute for advanced tactics and flawless designs. They asked how such inefficient vessels could ever stand against fleets that represented centuries of refinement. The veteran's only answer was a final warning: you will not understand until you face them, but by then, it will be too late to retreat. Though dismissed, his words lingered like an echo across the chamber's crystalline walls. Those who had laughed found themselves unable to shake the unease that settled in the silence after he sat down. They did not know it yet, but the galaxy had already crossed the threshold. The moment human ships moved beyond their home system, the rules of warfare, resilience, and survival would begin to change. Their mockery was the last comfort they would have before the truth revealed itself. The first clash came sooner than most had expected. Patrol fleets of a proud empire positioned themselves along a border where human vessels had begun to appear. To the alien commanders, It was an opportunity to demonstrate superiority, and to make an example of newcomers who dared move through space without proper reverence for those who already ruled it. Scouts reported the approach of a small Terran convoy, merchant hulls escorted by only a handful of warships that looked slow and outdated compared to the cutting-edge cruisers waiting to intercept. Confidence was absolute. Orders were issued with the calm assurance that victory would be swift and decisive, and that within hours there would be wreckage drifting as a warning to all who thought humans belonged in the deep roots of the galaxy. When the fleets engaged, the first exchange of fire seemed to confirm everything the aliens believed. Energy bolts struck thick human hulls, tearing away plating, blasting through outer sections, and sending debris into the void. Their sensors showed catastrophic damage, structural fractures, and crippled systems. Yet something disquieting began to emerge almost immediately. The human ships did not break formation. They did not slow. Even with massive wounds carved into their frames, they pressed forward, answering with barrages of kinetic projectiles and missiles that forced the attackers to maneuver under fire longer than they expected. One alien cruiser struck a human destroyer with a broadside intended to cut it in half. The sensors showed engines faltering and multiple decks venting atmosphere, but within moments auxiliary systems roared online. The ship, ugly and half-crippled, adjusted its trajectory and returned fire with uncanny precision. Redundant generators had powered up, shielding had reformed in patches, and what should have been a dying hulk became a furious predator, closing the gap and launching a volley that slammed through an enemy's weakened flank. The Council's earlier mockery, words about wasted armor and redundant systems, now echoed like a ghost, stripped of humor. The battle spiraled into chaos not because the humans overpowered their opponents, but because they simply refused to die when they were supposed to. Alien crews had been trained to expect surrender or catastrophic collapse once certain thresholds were reached. They were not prepared for opponents who treated catastrophic damage as little more than an inconvenience. Human captains rerouted power manually, crews patched ruptures in real time, and weapons fired from jury-rigged connections that should not have been possible. Systems designed to fail gracefully instead roared back to life with improvised solutions. What was dismissed as clumsy inefficiency now appeared as brutal resilience. Confusion rippled through the alien formation. Tactical AIs flagged human ships as destroyed only for them to return minutes later with improvised systems still enabling combat effectiveness. Formations broke down as commanders argued over whether to press the attack or retreat. A single freighter, heavily damaged but still operational, rammed an interceptor and split it apart. That act shattered the illusion of control. If mere transports could be turned into weapons even after sustaining massive damage, then every engagement with these newcomers promised costs no strategist had calculated. In desperation, the alien admiral gave the order to disengage. Losses were higher than anticipated, repairs would take months, and morale had cracked under the psychological weight of an enemy that refused the expected script of battle. As the fleet retreated, sensors still tracked battered human ships moving deliberately, flames and debris trailing from their hulls, yet advancing as though nothing short of annihilation could slow them. News of the clash traveled quickly. Reports circulated across networks, analyzed by military academies, politicians, and traders. The data was clear: human vessels lacked elegance, but they endured punishment beyond reason. Their tactics were brutal but effective. What was once dismissed as naivety was revealed as preparation for exactly the kind of unforgiving struggle the galaxy itself had long forgotten. Those who read the accounts felt a chill settle over them, remembering the veterans' words in the council chamber. The warning had not been exaggeration. The lesson had been delivered in the wreckage left behind. Said debris from the engagement was collected and analyzed with the precision of scholars who believed every fragment could be catalogued into an explanation. Alien technicians expected to uncover nothing more than crude machinery and outdated circuits, proof of human backwardness that would soothe the sting of retreat. Instead, the deeper they probed, the more disturbing the findings became. Components were rugged, overbuilt to absurd degrees, and far from elegant, but every piece revealed an underlying philosophy foreign to those who prized perfection above all else. Power systems had layers of redundancy, each capable of running at partial efficiency if others failed. Control nodes were built to allow both automated management and direct manual override, as though the designers had never trusted machines completely. Shielding appeared weak on first inspection, but hidden beneath were thick layers of reinforced alloys, heavy and cumbersome, yet able to absorb impacts that would vaporize thinner, more optimized designs. Even the engines, dismissed as inefficient, carried the ability to adapt to multiple fuels and function at reduced levels under catastrophic damage. What looked wasteful was in truth adaptability carved into every inch of the ship. Military analysts convened to interpret these discoveries, and the conclusions spread unease across their ranks. Human vessels were not built with the assumption of stability. They were designed with the certainty that things would go wrong. Where other species created ships intended never to fail, humans built ships that expected failure at every turn and yet continued to function. That mindset was something no algorithm could easily quantify. It was a worldview born of history, a people who had survived endless wars, disasters, and crises on their own world carried those lessons into the void. Reports highlighted specific cases from the battle that made sense only through this lens. The destroyer that reignited engines after losing its primary reactors had drawn on auxiliary systems wired redundantly across multiple decks. The freighter that rammed an interceptor had absorbed energy strikes that should have gutted it, but armor layering and compartmentalized construction allowed key sections to remain operational. Every action pointed to the same conclusion: these ships were not elegant weapons, they were survival platforms forged for people who had no intention of surrendering to chaos. The alien societies reviewing the evidence struggled with the implications. Their vessels embodied centuries of refinement, pursuing flawless efficiency, often leaving no margin for error. When systems collapsed, their sleek designs offered no alternatives. To them, redundancy was wasted mass, armor was an outdated concept, and manual overrides were obsolete relics of a pre-automation era. But humans treated those very features as essential. What others saw as imperfections were in truth deliberate safeguards, born from a culture that expected catastrophe yet demanded survival. The unsettling realization spread quickly: technology was only half the equation. The other half was the people who operated it. Human crews had demonstrated adaptability that matched their ships. They did not freeze when systems failed, they found ways to keep fighting. Every valve, every cable, every crude patch was an extension of their refusal to quit. The vessels were more than hardware. They were mirrors of the species itself. In council chambers and war colleges, debates grew heated. Some argued these design principles were primitive and unsustainable against coordinated pressure. Others pointed out that the first engagement had already disproved such arrogance. If a handful of ships could endure prolonged battle and inflict significant losses against a superior fleet, what would happen when humanity fielded more advanced versions of the same philosophy? The question carried a weight none wished to answer. The warning that once sounded like the paranoia of an aging veteran now hung heavy in every discussion. Human ships were not to be measured by sleek lines or advanced calculations. They were to be measured by their capacity to keep moving when logic dictated they should already be dead. And behind those ships stood a people who had built them precisely because they expected the universe to show no mercy. The galaxy now understood: what they had mistaken for weakness was a strength more dangerous than they had ever faced. The coalition gathered with determination to erase the embarrassment of the first defeat. Multiple powers that had never cooperated before now formed an uneasy alliance, convinced that overwhelming numbers would succeed where precision alone had failed. Hundreds of ships massed in a show of unity, their admirals certain that no species, no matter how stubborn, could withstand such force. The target was a human fleet moving along an outer corridor, far from the protective shadow of Earth. Strategists believed it would be a quick demonstration of dominance, the kind that would crush the rising legend before it spread further. When contact was made, the scale of the disparity was evident. Human vessels were few, scarred from prior encounters, and lacking the flawless symmetry of their opponents. To the coalition, it looked like a slaughter in the making. They advanced with carefully choreographed maneuvers, weapons primed, convinced that superiority in numbers would overwhelm any improvised tricks. Yet the moment the first salvos were exchanged, the familiar rhythm of expectation collapsed again. Human ships absorbed punishment in staggering amounts. Armor plates blackened, compartments vented into the void, and systems failed in bursts of fire, yet none ceased to fight. Crews worked with brutal efficiency, sealing breaches, rerouting power, and maintaining formation even under catastrophic damage. What had been dismissed as inefficiency became a rhythm of survival that no algorithm could predict. Every ship carried backup upon backup, and every crew acted as though the destruction of one system was simply the signal to switch to another. The battle descended into chaos, as humans employed tactics no enemy had prepared for. Damaged frigates used their remaining thrust to ram larger opponents, detonating their warheads at point-blank range. Freighters that should have retreated instead pressed forward, using reinforced hulls as blunt weapons against lightly shielded escorts. Even shattered corvettes drifted deliberately into enemy formations, triggering detonations that tore gaps into otherwise perfect lines. What the coalition had expected to be weaknesses became unpredictable strikes that disrupted formations and sowed panic. Alien admirals tried to adapt, issuing new orders, but the fluidity of human improvisation defied their logic. Their vessels relied on precision coordination, each component of a fleet acting as part of a larger machine. When humans broke those patterns with chaotic, brutal tactics, cracks formed everywhere. Coordinated salvos faltered as commanders diverted resources to deal with unexpected ramming attacks. Escorts peeled away to intercept damaged transports that refused to retreat, leaving capital ships exposed. The perfection of their structure was turned against them by adversaries who refused to respect its limits. Losses mounted. Every alien ship destroyed was a shock, not because defeat was impossible, but because the humans simply should not have been capable of delivering such blows. Reports streamed in of cruisers crippled by collisions, of carriers set ablaze by swarms of improvised missiles launched from ships that had already been declared non-functional. Psychological strain spread through the ranks. Crews who had believed victory inevitable now faced an enemy that treated annihilation as just another tactic. By the time the order to withdraw was given, the cost was already catastrophic. Entire squadrons were gone, morale was in tatters, and the legend of human resilience had grown beyond denial. The battered Terran fleet still moved, scarred and trailing wreckage, but advancing as if the void itself could not stop them. Their survival was not luck, nor technological superiority, but the relentless philosophy of a species that fought through collapse rather than yielding to it. Across the galaxy, the message spread faster than the wreckage could be cleared. Numbers had not broken them. Precision had not destroyed them. Human ships were proving what the warning had already promised. They were not fragile machines, but stubborn extensions of the people who built them. And those people carried into battle the unshakable belief that survival was earned through endurance, not perfection. The coalition had come seeking to end a threat, but all they had accomplished was proving it real. Whispers turned to doctrines in the wake of the coalition's defeat. The galaxy, once united in dismissing humanity as reckless beginners, now reeled under the undeniable reality that their fleets were something altogether different. War colleges dissected the battles frame by frame, searching for flaws in human methods, yet every conclusion circled back to the same point: these ships and their crews had redefined endurance. Where others engineered for elegance and precision, humanity engineered for survival, and no amount of arrogance could erase the truth that had been proven in fire. Empires began altering their doctrines, drafting proposals for thicker hulls, redundant generators, and emergency protocols inspired by the crude systems once mocked. Yet imitation proved hollow. The weight of such designs strained economies that had grown complacent under the promise of optimization. Their factories stumbled trying to produce ships meant to break all rules of efficiency. Worse still, even when hardware was mimicked, the crews could not match the mindset. Species that had never lived in constant confrontation with hardship lacked the instinctive drive to keep fighting when systems collapsed. Engineers could copy steel, but they could not replicate the human refusal to yield. Trade networks carried tales faster than fleets could travel. Merchants described human convoys limping across lanes, patched and scarred yet still operational, escorted by guardians that looked more like drifting fortresses than sleek predators. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones about ships that should have been lifeless husks but continued to fire long after defeat was certain. The stories hardened into reputation, and that reputation became deterrence. Borders once wide open to opportunistic raids began to close. Plans for preemptive strikes against Earth quietly dissolved in the shadows of strategic councils. The cost had already been made clear, and no empire wished to bear it again. For humanity, the victories were not celebrated as triumphs of glory but acknowledged as affirmations of their design philosophy. Their admirals and captains understood that their ships were not invincible. They were fragile in ways, limited in others, but they embodied the single principle that had carried their species from primitive survival to the void, persistence. Every vessel built was a promise that even in ruin, humans would continue forward. They did not crave perfection, because they knew perfection shattered too easily. They built for the long struggle, and the long struggle was what the galaxy had been forced to witness. The veteran who had once stood in the council chamber and issued his lonely warning lived long enough to see the shift. His words were no longer dismissed as paranoia, they had become the foundation of a new understanding. Across the stars, strategists and leaders recalled his voice. Human ships are special, and you will discover why. That phrase echoed through classrooms, military briefings, and even in the quiet conversations of traders who steered clear of Terran routes. The truth had settled like an immovable weight. Humanity had changed the equation forever. Generations ahead, the scars of those first confrontations remained visible. Entire sectors marked where fleets had been humbled now served as grim reminders of the cost of underestimation. No monument was needed, for the legacy was etched into the very conduct of galactic war. Caution replaced arrogance whenever human fleets appeared on scanners. The silhouette of their ships, once mocked for their ungainly frames, now evoked unease in even the boldest captains. They were not feared because they were perfect. They were feared because they were imperfect by design, and in that imperfection lay a terrifying invincibility. The galaxy's great lesson had been written not in treaties, nor in speeches, but in the persistence of ships that refused to fall when they should have been broken. Humanity had arrived among the stars, and their message was silent yet unshakable. They would not be erased, not by superior numbers, not by refined technology, and not by arrogance. The future would forever remember that when the void demanded surrender, human ships kept moving, carrying with them the relentless will of the species that built them.